Hey everyone, Jovan D here. I just got back from a long camping trip and it helped me get into the mindset for a survival series. A few people have requested survival related videos for their own projects, and although that's not very specific, there are a few things that all survival games have in common, like stats that consistently go down and need replenishment. Today's video is our first survival series, and we'll be getting hungry. We'll be getting thirsty, but most of all, we'll be getting tired, Dutch.
Alright, so this video is the only video in the series where we are going to start the project from scratch. So just a moment here, the only thing we're going to make sure that we need to have is some type of character to have these stats deplete from them and can interact with stuff later on. Really any blueprint will do as long as it's a character. Honestly, as long as it's an actor, we can always add these stats to it. Doesn't really matter. I'm just going to use my normal third-person character because this character already has some locomotion set up. You can easily move them around the environment, but honestly, you can use any template. And even later, you can add the templates later on to your project really easily. Let's go ahead and create this project and wait for it to load up. Perfect, now we have our project loaded up. If you wanted to add templates to your project later on, I know I've mentioned this before, you just click on Add New, Add Feature or Content Pack, just click it, Add to Project. Really easy in case for some reason you started a blank project or something else. So right now we have our third-person character blueprint in the level, in an environment, but when we play, he doesn't have any sort of stats, he doesn't have any health, he just kind of exists and has locomotion. He can move around, and that's about it. So in this video, our goal is to give that character some stats that immediately start depleting because time kills everything.
Time is the true enemy of us all. Time kills everything.
Let's go ahead and open up our blueprint so we can add these stats that can be depleted over time. So we have the default scripting in our event graph. This just came directly from when we imported the project. We're going to scroll down, give ourselves some space. We're going to add some variables so we can keep track of some information for our character. And in this video, that information that we're going to keep track of is our character's stats. So let's go ahead and add a variable here. We're going to call this one health. Right now, by default, it's set up to a boolean. Booleans are simply a true-false value, which doesn't really work for a health value. A health value should either normally be an integer or a float. I'm going to use a float because a float is a value from 0 to 1. It can go past that, but generally it's a value from 0 to 1, and that keeps track of the percentage of health that our character has. The default value of a float when you first create it is 0, so our character would have 0% health, which means they would die immediately. I want to change the default value to 1, which means our character would have full health when you first start the game. We have gone over float values for health before, but just to reiterate, I like using them because it's only one value. If you end up using integers, you will need an integer for your current health and also another integer variable to represent your maximum health. And from that, you can get a percentage of your health for widgets, but I like just using floats. It is easier, but if you have a plan for your character's maximum health to increase during gameplay due to leveling up or something like that, perhaps you want to use an integer. That way you can increase your maximum health value instead of just using a float, which can't really be increased very easily. Either way, for this example, I'm going to be using a float to represent my character's health. I don't intend on having my character's maximum health increase during the game. We also need a variable to represent our hunger. And we're going to have a bar on screen, and that bar is going to be completely full when our character is not hungry. So we don't really want to call the variable hunger because the bar will be full with hunger over it, and you might get confused thinking that you're full of hunger. It does get a little bit confusing, and we can call it energy or stamina, which can be increased through eating. So I'm going to call it stamina. And for this variable, I'm also going to use a float to represent my stamina. Same thing as before, if you plan on having your stamina have a maximum value that increases throughout the game, it may be better to have an integer represent your current stamina and another integer variable represent your maximum stamina so that you can increase your maximum stamina throughout the game. I'm not going to be covering that in this video, but it is pretty easy. If you request it, I can do a video on it specifically on increasing maximum stats. By default, the float value for stamina is 0. Let's go ahead and just change that to 1. That way we start off with 100% stamina. If you don't want your character to start off with 100% stamina, you can go ahead and just change that to 50% stamina or whatever you want your character to start off with when the game begins. So the next variable we want to create is for our character when they get thirsty. This is going to be our hydration levels. So let's go ahead and create another variable. Once again, another float, and we're going to call this hydration. And our hydration is going to be probably the same as our stamina. I think I put that at 50%. Let me make sure. Yes. You can always check the default value just by clicking on the variable, and it'll show you right here our health, of course, 100%, stamina 50%, hydration 50%. The last variable that we are going to keep track of is our tiredness, the fatigue that our player has undergone. And since 100% of this variable is going to show that we are not tired, 0% means that we are tired. That means that we can't use the name fatigue because 100% fatigued would imply that you are completely tired, and that would go against how we have the other variables named. So I'm going to name this sleep. 100% sleep means that your character is 100% fully awake. 0% sleep means that you would be tired. So let's go ahead and call this sleep. Pretty simple. You can always change the name later on as well. Same thing, we're going to go ahead and make it 100% and a float. Alright, now we have some variables that our player's keeping track of. If we play though, they're just in the background. Those variables are being stored, they're not being altered, they're not being changed. Time is not affecting them in any way at this moment, but our character does have those variables stored on him. The next thing we need to do is get those variables to decrease over time. So what we can do is create a function to go ahead and decrease each of these variables. The first one I'm going to do is for stamina. I'll go ahead and call it decrease stamina. To create a function, just hit this plus button right on the functions tab. It'll bring you to a new tab here. It's separate from the event graph. With any sort of function, all you have to do on that same blueprint is just right click and you can call the function at any time, and you can plug it in. Let's say when we increase our axis moving forward, we also want to decrease stamina. Boom, that's all you'd have to do. And then it would call this function. Now right now our function's not doing anything. It fires and nothing's plugged into it, so this wouldn't affect gameplay at all. Now let's go ahead and make sure that this function does something. It's called decrease stamina, so we definitely want to see what our stamina is. Let's go ahead and get our stamina. Getting the stamina will just bring the current value of the stamina and put it on the graph. So now we can pull off and we know the stamina, whatever it is, we can do something to it. We're going to go ahead and subtract a float by a float. So we're subtracting this amount by whatever this is set to, the B. If you click on this, subtraction A, which is the top pin, will be subtracted by B, the bottom pin. Then we'll have a return value, which will be this mathematical equation's result. So how much do we want to reduce our stamina by every single time we call this function? Later on, we can change this amount that's reducing our stamina. We can have it dependent on the area that we're in. We can have it dependent on what we're doing. But at the moment, we're just going to have a flat amount subtract from our stamina every single time we call this function. And I'm going to have this be 5%. So what do we do with this return value? Well, we go ahead and grab our stamina again, but we're going to set our stamina variable to this return value. Now, every single time we call this function, we're going to get our current stamina variable, we're going to subtract it by 5%, and then we're going to set our current stamina variable to what it was minus 5%. So the first time it's called, it will go from 50% to 45%. The next time it's called, this amount here, stamina, will be 45%, subtract by another 5%, and it will become 40% over and over and over. I'm going to do the same function for hydration and sleep. A quick way to do that is just to duplicate. All you have to do is right-click on the function, click on duplicate, and you'll get an exact copy of what that was. I do want to rename it though. This is going to be for hydration, if I can type. And we're going to set our hydration and get our hydration simply this way, really fast. And we can go ahead and get rid of the stamina variables. Let's go ahead and fast forward really fast for the decrease sleep function. Sleep. And that's perfect. We have decreased stamina up here. We have decreased hydration up here. We also have decreased sleep. We will need one for decreased health, but that's going to be dependent on what we're doing. We'll be using some inputs here later on for that. I'm not going to get into that this video. We're just going to decrease these three stats: stamina, hydration, and sleep. And even though those functions exist, when we start playing, we haven't actually set any events to call those functions. So they're never going to be called no matter what we do, because we haven't specified when they need to be called. Now we have to tell the engine when do we want these functions to be called and start decreasing our character's stats. Well, I know for most survival games, your stats start decreasing as soon as you spawn. So we're going to do an event, begin play. Events are exactly what I just said. It's telling the engine when. Event begin play is do this when the game begins. When this character spawns into the world, begin doing this. And we're not just going to do, decrease stamina, decrease hydration, decrease sleep, because then they would only fire once. So this is how events work. If we plug in our functions like this, yes, when the game begins, we will decrease stamina, hydration, and sleep. But it will only happen once, because this event only fires once when the game begins play. For example, I'm going to print string our current stamina, hydration, and sleep all onto screen every single frame. Print string simply just writes the text on screen. So let's do hydration. And let's do sleep. So what I just did here is every single frame on the screen, we will print the string for our stamina, our hydration, and our sleep. We know that stamina is set to 50%. We know hydration is set to 50%. We know sleep is set to 100%. So let's compile and save. So when we start to play, we'll see on screen our print string is showing the current values of our stamina, our hydration, and our sleep. So it's no longer showing 100%. It's no longer showing 50% or 50%. They are showing one function call below that, which means if we open our third-person character, when we started the game, this function was called once, once, and once. But that's not what we want. We want this to continuously happen over time. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So the easiest way to do this and have this continue to happen at specific increments of time is to use something called a timer. We're going to set a timer by function name. All we have to do is right-click on the event graph, go ahead and set timer by function name. You can also do it by event, but function name is perfect for us in this scenario. Go ahead and move these off to the side just for demonstration. So now we have our timer by function name set up. The object, if you don't change it to anything, it's going to default to this blueprint, which is the third-person character blueprint, which is perfect because we're going to call functions that this blueprint has. We have to directly type in the function name, exactly how it's spelled here on the function list. The first one that we're going to type in is decrease stamina. Time is going to ask us how often do we want this function to be called. I want this function to be called every 4 seconds, which is far too often for a balanced game. Our character would run out of stamina way too quickly. Should probably be in the minutes, but this is just for demonstration. And then looping is very important. We're going to want to click yes on looping. Otherwise, it'll happen just like it did before. It'll be called once, and then it will stop. But if we're looping, every 4 seconds, this function will be called again. We can have an initial start delay. We can have a variance with that initial start delay, but we're good for now. And this should be good for an example. Every 4 seconds, we're going to call the function decrease stamina with this timer. None of the other ones are going to be called at all. Even though they're on the event graph, they're not plugged into anything, so they're never going to be executed. So our hydration and sleep are going to stay at what they are by default, 100%, 50%, but we'll see our stamina decrease by 5% every single time the timer fires the function. Let's go ahead and play. We'll see 100%, 50%. 4 seconds have gone by. We can now see that one of the variables is going down to 40%. We can see it's going down even further, 35%. Like I said, this is far too quick for any reasonable video game. You would be down to 0% very fast. But we do want all of our stats to go down significantly over time. So let's go ahead and copy the timer by function and copy another one. We're just going to have to change the name to match the ones that we want to be called. This is going to be decrease hydration and decrease sleep. Realistically, your hunger does not change as fast as your hydration does. So hydration, I'm going to keep it 4 seconds. Hunger, let's change it to 10 seconds. And sleep, this is going to be more like 30 seconds. All of them are on looping. All of them have different times. But this should work perfectly. If we go and we play, we're going to see all of these are going to start changing at different rates, set by the timer. Thirst is really going down fast. And we can see that our stats are going down. Alright, so we did actually run into one thing that I wanted to prevent. We have one of our variables going into the negatives because we didn't prevent it from surpassing the negative. In order to prevent our variables from going into the negative, we need to go to these functions that are decreasing them. And we need to check to see if the value that it's set to is less than or equal to 0. If this value becomes less than or equal to 0, we just want to change our stamina to 0. And we've done something like this in the past. Every single time this function's called now, we'll see that it is subtracted, and if it goes below 0, we're going to change it just directly to 0. Let's do that for our decrease hydration. Go ahead and plug that in. Then we are going to set our hydration to 0. Same thing with decrease sleep. Perfect. And now we have our variables, and because we're setting them to 0, if they go below 0, they will actually never go below 0. We can wait this out, speed it up a little bit. And here we are. We have our thirst at 0%, and even every 4 seconds, it's going to remain at 0%. It's never going to change because our function tells it to go back to 0% if it's less than 0%. If we waited long enough, all of these would eventually reach 0% because they are consistently and gradually going down. But every single time that I do a print string, I end up getting just bored and frustrated with how boring it looks. So let's go ahead and create a widget, and let's put these variables on screen, make them look pretty nice. Here in the content browser, we're going to right-click, User Interface, Widget Blueprint. Hopefully you've followed some videos in the past and know basically what a widget blueprint is. I'm going to rename this, and I'm just going to call it Stats Widget. As a quick overview, widgets appear on screen directly. They are a graphic that can represent multiple things. They can be menus, they can be status bars, they can be any sort of on-screen graphic that you can think of. An aimer, HUD, anything. We're going to use this kind of like a HUD, a heads-up display. Go ahead and search a progress bar. This is going to be health, this is going to be hunger, this is going to be thirst, and sleep. You can always rename them here on the top right. progress bar, health. Perfect. You'll see that they're all stacked on top of each other. So if we select each one, boom, 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 bam. Let's go ahead and put them in a box. We're going to put them in a vertical box. Drag our vertical box onto the canvas, and then let's put our health on top, stamina right underneath that, hydration underneath that, and sleep underneath that. Since this box is a vertical box, they're just going to be stacked right on top of one another. For each of these progress bars, you can click on that specific bar and change what the fill, color, and opacity looks like. You can change the percent that it's represented on the widget. Even though this is not going to accurately represent the variable, it will change once the game begins. But for health, you know what? Let's just do a quick green. For stamina, probably a yellow. For hydration, you know what? You probably want a blue for hydration. For sleep, gray probably represents sleep because it's nighttime, I assume. Something like that. If you want to change the position of the vertical box, you can click on it and drag it wherever you want, or you can just change the position in X and Y here on the details panel. If you want to change the size, this is a good place to do it as well. By default, it looks like all of these progress bars are filling up horizontally but not filling up vertically. So we can click on each of them and just switch them from auto to fill. Stamina, fill, hydration, fill, and sleep, fill. Now they're evenly filling up the vertical box, and if you change it, it should fill up in real time, no matter what size you put it to. I made it pretty darn big, not gonna lie. So let's make it a little smaller. If you don't want these progress bars directly stacked on top of one another, you can always change the padding. Here, if you expand, we'll have top padding and bottom padding. Let's just do a small amount like 10. For the bottom, we can do another small amount like 10. For hydration, let's do 10. Sleep, just to make it even, we can do a 10. The thing about Unreal is when you play, it's not going to automatically appear on screen either. You have to tell the widget when to appear on screen. You also have to tell the widget what the progress bars are supposed to represent. Even though we named them the variable names from our third-person character, that's really just a tool for us to know what they represent. For us to tell the engine what it represents, we have to actually bind the percentage amount to our third-person character's variables. That will tell it what the progress bar represents. In order to do that, we do need a variable for our third-person character inside of our widget. So let's go ahead and add third-person character. And pretty easy, we're just going to change it to third-person character, object reference. And what we are going to need to do for the third-person character reference is make sure that this is instance editable and expose on spawn, compile, and save. This variable to our third-person character is very helpful if it has instance editable and expose on spawn enabled. Because if we have multiple third-person characters in the level, and one of their stats changes but the rest of them don't, this widget isn't going to know which instance of that third-person character to display. Since we have this instance editable and expose on spawn, when we create the widget, we can tell it, hey, this is the exact instance that I want you to display. Let's go ahead and move these off to the side, and when the game begins, we're also going to create a widget. Which widget are we going to create? Well, we're going to create the stats widget that we just made. Stats widget. And when we create the stats widget, it's going to ask us, hey, we have this variable for a third-person character. Which instance of the third-person character in the level do you want to be used as the variable in the widget? Well, I just want myself to be used, which is the exact instance that we're going to have control of. We'll promote this to a variable. We'll just call this stats widget. And we do need to add this to the viewport as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't appear on screen. And we'll plug that right into our timers. Very nice. Now when the game begins, we're going to get our stats widget. We're going to add it to the viewport, and we're going to start our timers for our functions. Lastly, like I said, we need to bind our health bar and stamina, hydration, and sleep to the variables from our third-person character. Since we do already have a reference to that character, we can actually just bind them right now. Let's get health. We're going to bind to our third-person character. This is important. Before, you would have seen that this third-person character did not appear. That's because we didn't have our variable of our third-person character yet. Now it does appear. So we can pick it, and we can go ahead and bind that to our health. For stamina, we can go ahead and choose third-person character, bind it to our stamina for our third-person character. Same with hydration, bind it to hydration. For sleep, we will go ahead and bind that to our sleep. Excellent. And at this point, if we go ahead and play, yes, we're still going to get our print string on screen, but also the bars are going to update in real time in accordance with that print string because they're just showing the variables. Our thirst is declining much faster than anything else because that's how we set our timer. Our hunger is also declining fairly quickly, and our sleep down here on the bottom is eventually going to decrease as well. Eventually.
A few moments later.
There we go. So we know it's working. These amounts on the print string directly correspond to our player character's widget. If you're like me and you get annoyed by all of the print strings on the screen, you can go ahead and just delete all of the event tick information, save, compile, and play. Now you'll have your variables accurately represented by the widget on screen. And that's perfect. At this point, you have a character blueprint who has some stats, and those stats are being depleted pretty significantly and consistently.
Well, now that our character is on their way to dying, we're going to bring this video to a close. In the next video, we'll create a few items for our character to replenish their stats and help keep them alive a little bit longer in this cruel world that we're developing for them. So don't forget to like the video, maybe subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below of what you want this survival series to cover in the future. I'm here to help you think like a game developer and stick around for more videos like this.